Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. I've seen a lot of posts recently about MSP owners that are just beside themselves with frustration when it comes to sales and marketing. And I've also been speaking to my own MSP clients, and I've been seeing some of that as well. So I thought I'd make this video where ideally you can learn from all the mistakes I've made, and I can teach you everything I know about sales and marketing and the process that has made me successful. So you should be able to take that process, apply it to your own unique circumstances, and then go from there. Now, let's start off with the juicy part, which are all of my failures. So I actually spent 5 years trying to do E&O insurance for CPA firms. And I wrote the best-selling book on E&O insurance for CPA firms. I wrote the best-selling book on cyber insurance for CPA firms. And most didn't care. The industry's crumbling, and it just sucked. So as it turned out, that market was super heavily saturated at the time. People just didn't see the need. They were super price sensitive. And I was competing against a bunch of people who would say or do anything to get a sale, regardless of how unethical or untrue their statements were. So there were many circumstances where I could show my potential client in black and white, hey, that's just not true. By the actual policy language here, and they just didn't care because they're like, oh, well, yours is, an extra few $1,000s a year or whatever the case would be. So it was very, very frustrating. Now, I wrote books, like I said before. I went to the biggest trade shows. I wrote magazine articles, etc. None of that really seemed to work. And spoiler alert, one of the mistakes I made was that I had this idea that if I wrote the first book on this topic, that people would be like, man, there's so much stuff in here. Like, he must know what he's talking about. As it turns out, managing partners of CPA firms are generally quite busy people, and they're not going to be reading 400-page books. Now, in the process, I learned a lot, and I'm thankful for that, but writing a book just wasn't the best idea. Likewise, magazine articles. Most CPA firms don't actually read the magazine articles from their own publications. So those magazine articles tended to just go on the desk in the waiting room. And so I had a whole bunch of people reading all this material that I spent a ton of time on, and it wasn't really my target audience. So at the end of the day, they just didn't care. There was nothing I could do to make them care. And I effectively just hated my job. I was probably in the same position you are if you're still watching this, where you're like, man, I was just beside myself. Like, how do I make this work? Well, let's kind of go through some of the mistakes I made that I think you can learn from. Obviously, I pivoted to a large degree to a different industry, so now I work with MSPs, but it really speaks to my background anyways. And so I really, really enjoy my job. I get asked to speak all over the country. I have more opportunities than I know what to do with. And I think if you use this formula, you could be in that same position. So first, let's talk about some of the mental blocks that I experienced. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to drink water here because my throat is killing me. So some of the mental blocks that I experienced, and maybe you are experiencing as well, is you could be thinking like, hey, no one's gonna care. Or if I put this information out there, I could look stupid, right? Like, you have this idea in your head that everybody's gonna care about what you're saying and you're gonna be ridiculed, or it doesn't have this specific detail or that specific detail. Don't worry about it. Next, you may be thinking, hey, they're going to know I'm new, right? So this is for the new MSPs out there or the younger guys where you're like, hey, I have to go approach these, 50, 60-year-old business owners with decades of experience. And they're going to know I'm new, and they're going to think that I'm young, and they're going to be like, hey, I don't want to talk to the young guy. I want to talk to the other old guy with experience. I'd say especially when it comes to technology, that's not true. Just because you're young, that doesn't mean that's necessarily detrimental. It could actually be beneficial to you. Now, you could also be saying, hey, what do I have that the other guy doesn't have? And this is a problem I had. Because I'm like, hey, insurance policy looks just like insurance policy, or your stack just looks like the other guy's stack. Get that out of your mind. You're not actually selling your stack, just like, technically I sell insurance, but there's way more to it than that. And we're going to get into that. Next, you could have this mental block where you're like, well, if I do sales and marketing, being ignored hurts, right? Like, it's a blow to the ego, or being rejected That sucks. So to give you an example, one time I sat down for 2 weeks, and every day after work till about midnight, I am just consuming every piece of material I could on cold emails and how I could use cold emails to generate additional business. And man, I poured over this stuff and I wrote what I thought was the perfect email. And I will tell you, I sent out hundreds of these things. One, I'd say like 99% of people just ignored it. And the few replies I got were effectively, leave me alone. Why? Because that's what everybody else is doing. And frankly, like, do you reply to cold emails? Like, probably not. Now, at the end of the day, I think with all of those mental blocks that I had in mind, I was really being an idiot, and you might be too. Why? Well, let's look at your specific circumstances. One, in a very broad sense, the world is just full of unhappy people. You could catch the best guy on a bad day, and you're going to think that guy hates you. Or you could misinterpret the way that the email sounds. And so to the guy that sent it, maybe it wasn't that rude. He was just in a hurry, but maybe to you, like it's this death blow. Don't worry about that. If you're going to say anything, you're always going to have some amount of naysayers, some amount of unhappy people out there. So just get that out of your mind. Next, the trend in cybersecurity events, like people need your help. All right. So you guys you have to get over this mental block about sales and marketing. And I understand where that comes from, right? It's your technical people. Generally, I wouldn't classify MSPs as being particularly extroverted. It's really, hey, you kind of fell in love with like dealing with like the fine technical details and the intricacies of networks and cybersecurity. So you're like, sales and marketing, like it's just not my thing. You got to get over that. The next thing you need to understand is when I first started out, I really thought, I had this, probably this like big complex in my brain of like, I don't know enough. I don't know enough. I don't know enough. Like I got to go out there and like wow these people and like knock their socks off. And what I finally realized was that I think to a large degree, I went from like 0 to 100 way too fast. And what's simple to you may be indecipherable to somebody else. So you could be sitting there and you're like, why, I'm not going to write, or I'm not going to make a video or give a presentation on like MFA or 2FA because like that's too simple. I got to do something that's like way cooler than that. And I got to make them think that I'm like super smart and like, this big guy. Please don't do that. I did that and it just blew up in my face, and it's not useful because people can't take any information away. All right. So even large companies on like the cyber insurance side of my business, you'd be shocked. The large companies that don't have cyber insurance, don't have 2FA, don't have MFA. And very frequently, because I'm the insurance guy, instead of going to their IT person, the business owners will come to me and they'll be like, hey, so my IT guy said like I need this 2FA thing. I don't really even know what that means. Like, can you tell me like, what is it? What are the vendors? Like, is it worth the cost? Who should I go to? How hard is it to implement? Is it, they have all these ideas that it's going to be like particularly onerous, so people are throwing around 2FA and MFA and SSO and all these terms, and nobody just ever broke it down, as we'd say in the military, nobody just broke it down Barney style to where it's very, very simple. And I think that somewhat counterintuitively, the simpler that you make something, that really shows the mastery that you have, right? It's very easy to make something complex, but it's very difficult and time consuming to make something very complex, very simple that is usable for somebody else. So don't discount what you think is simple because it's potentially indecipherable to somebody else. And then I'll just repeat it again, man. Businesses need your help. They need your help. For the love of God, please start marketing so I can get some sleep at night. Businesses are just getting crushed. And at the end of the day, remember this, these are real people with real businesses that have mortgages and kids and families to feed. And the more you put yourself out there into the world and the more you help the world, the better the world's going to be. Now, people can make sales and marketing very, very complex. But once again, don't build a 30-piece screwdriver. What does all of this really boil down to? Your goal, you're trying to match up your particular expertise and knowledge level, and we're going to talk about that, with the people that both need it and want it. Now, if I go back to my days of insurance for CPA firms, when I was out there beating that circuit really hard, did they need the information that I had? Yes. Did they necessarily want the information that I had? No. And I say that because a lot of them, they're like, hey, I've had insurance for 30 years. These things you're bringing up, it's super interesting. I'll keep in mind, but maybe I've never had that problem. So I'll just tell the other partners, or I'll tell my insurance guy, and then that'll be the end of it. It'll be easier than switching. All right. So they both have to need the expertise you have and want the expertise you have. And that's about as simple as it gets. Now, here's some eternal truths that have been very, very useful to me that I think could also be very, very useful to you. And this is how I now run my business. We can think of this as kind of, somebody put it as like the ethical framework to sales and marketing. So first, you must give before you receive, and free is awesome. What do I mean about give before you receive? Let's say every month I get a postcard in the mail from Weber Grills, and they're like, hey, you should buy our stuff, buy our stuff, buy our stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't grill, I've never grilled, or I already have a grill and it's probably fine. And so it's just another piece of tchotchke that I get in the mail and I throw it away. Now compare that to, let's say if Weber Grills decided, hey, we're going to send out every month instead of like this straight sales piece, with like, hey, here's a discount, get 10% off, whatever. We're just going to put out grilling recipes. Or maybe they'll get super specific and they'll say, we're going to put out grilling recipes for suburban dads with 2 kids. So it's like, hey, how to feed your kids with a grill in under 10 minutes. And every month they're sending this stuff out. Well, eventually, I'm going to be like, dude, that's awesome. It's free. I don't feel like I'm being marketed to because they're giving me something with no ask of return whatsoever. Yeah, so maybe I start grilling, right? And then I start grilling and then I realize like, man, you know what? Like my grill's really a piece of shit. It's been on my backyard. It's been rained on. Maybe the grates are getting rusty, or I start utilizing these recipes and I'm like, hey man, you know what? Like I really need more room here. I better upgrade this grill. Like who do you think's the first company I'm going to go to? I actually don't really even know any grill companies. Weber is just, I think, the grill that I have, but I have to go back and check. It's the first one that came to mind. You best believe Weber is going to be top of mind, right? Because why? They were giving, and then ultimately I decided to give back as opposed to them saying, get our stuff, buy our stuff. All right, now free is awesome. What do I mean by that? The more you help the world, the more the world will give you, right? So the more information that you're putting out to the world, the more you're trying to help people. It doesn't, I'll say it's a longer tail sales and marketing process as opposed to the like buy our stuff. But I think in the long term, it's much more sustainable. And also you're going to get higher quality clients and you're going to get more clients in the long run. Okay. So first thing you got to do is ignore this whole phrase of sales and marketing and just start thinking like, how do I help the world with the knowledge that I have inside of my head? Now with that, fundamentally, what are you trying to sell? You are not selling your stack of technology. You are not selling the services that you have to offer. Fundamentally, you are selling trust. And that trust is going to be built up because the more you give, people are going to trust you, right? So if I go back to my previous analogy and I go, you know, at this company that's just, they keep sending me these free grilling recipes and these are great recipes and my kids love them. Like these guys are into the grilling world. Like that's their lifestyle. They're putting time and effort into this to find the best recipes that work for me. Those are the guys that I want to do business with. Why? Because I trust them, right? That maybe I'd never heard of them before, but I'm like, if they continually do something like this, they're obviously invested in this space. They're not some fly-by-night company that I've never heard of. Over time, they've built up trust, and that's something I think that you should focus on as well. Next, you have to realize if you're going to just do what everybody else does, you're going to end up just like everybody else. So I would encourage you, there's a really funny British show called Taskmaster, where they give people tasks, and then it's all these different ways that people come up with how to accomplish said task in their own unique way. So just start thinking like, you don't have to do what everybody else does. There's no law that says you have to spend, the next 10 years diving into every little single nuance of SEO, for example, or pay-per-click. Or just because it works for somebody else, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. All right, so get that out of your mind as well. Do something unique. Now let's talk about the priorities I see for MSPs. And this is over, the last couple of years of working with this industry and where I think it's going sideways. Where do I see where do I see the priorities actually put? So first I would say MSPs super concerned about knowledge. They're like, hey, I'm coming from internal IT and I'm thinking about starting an MSP. Like, here's my background. What do you guys think? Or they'll say like, hey, I'm starting an MSP in the next couple months. This is the technology stack I have. Like, what do you guys think? Then I see questions about, hey, you know what? Like, I need to hire somebody else, or how do you deal with this administrative issue, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, what I see is sales and marketing questions, but it's really just based around, I think, complete and utter frustration. And I don't think that that's going to be the right priority. So what do I think should happen? I think that first, knowledge should be the bedrock of everything. And foremost in that is do no harm. And I'll explain what that means in a second. Next, I think should be sales and marketing. That should take priority. Why? Because it enables you to bring in an extra administrator as your business is growing. It enables you to include additional technology features within your business. Now, why did I say that knowledge comes first? Well, foremost, please don't fake it till you make it. That is a stupid phrase that works for Instagram influencers. It doesn't work for true professionals trying to help the world. Now, I do think you should learn it till you earn it. So you have to reach a base level of competency and then just keep learning forever. So you don't have to know everything. And that's always a stumbling block that I had in the beginning, was I just don't know everything. And I still want to become an expert in what I'm doing, but I also realize there's only so much out there, right? And then at some point you just got to pull the trigger, and you have to realize you are going to make mistakes at the end of the day. And we're all human, and everyone's going to do that. Now with competency, you should be able to minimize those mistakes in the beginning, but don't beat yourself up if a client comes to you with a completely unique situation or a completely unique problem. Now, you're never going to learn it all, but please keep trying. Now, with that, knowledge levels play an important part in your sales and marketing process. Why? Well, in the beginning, I get it. You got to go an inch deep and a mile wide. You got to do business with everybody that comes through the door because you have to keep the business operating. Essentially, you're a generalist. Now, you have to do that to survive, but eventually the next step is you need to start specializing in specific industries, and that's going to make your life 1,000,000 times easier. Why? Well, there's a difference between going to a car dealership and saying hey, you should be worried about IT and cybersecurity, compared to saying, hey, car dealerships, here was this case that came out from the Federal Trade Commission where they pinged this specific car dealership with a 20-year consent order and this huge list of mandatory cybersecurity controls because of this specific incident. So some of the things you should focus on as a car dealership to avoid a similar circumstance would be XYZ controls. You can see in the second example, that's where a car dealership is going to go, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. He knows my industry. There's some at least initial level of trust you've built up there. Whereas in the first one, you're just another guy trying to sell stuff to somebody. All right. So you don't just want to be the guy selling stuff. Eventually, you want to get to the point where you can really provide the most value to a select group of individuals. Now, I would argue you need to specialize in industries you enjoy. Like I particularly enjoy working with MSPs. Why? I'm a former IT. I got my bachelor's in robotics. I've got a master's in cyber law. And it's just fun to nerd out with other nerds. All right. So like if you're watching this, you're a nerd just like I'm a nerd. Like could I do medical malpractice insurance? Yeah, but I don't really care about that stuff. Could I provide insurance for artwork? Yeah, I don't know the first thing about art. I don't really care about art. My wife has a degree in art history, so like she really knows about it and she really cares about it. But like, we went to the Louvre in Paris and I'm like, all right, it's kind of cool. Like saw the Mona Lisa. I'm like, all right, that's kind of cool. So for me, I'm like, all right, I checked that box. For my wife, that was like this lifetime experience, right? Where she could tell me all about like the different painters and the different techniques and why this person was like so unique and different and how they, made this big splash in the scene. For her, God bless her if she wanted to do it. I think she'd be very successful insuring artwork because that's something she really cares about. Whereas me, I just don't really care about art in that way. I care way more about, say, the MSP industry. Now, finally, you may eventually get here, but you don't have to. And that's where you go a mile deep and a mile wide. And that's where you dominate various specialties. All right. So that's necessary if you're going to expand in a strategic fashion where you're like, okay, I'll give you my example, right? Is I have business owners, MSP business owners come to me all the time. And they're like, I need business owner policy. I need a commercial auto policy. I need a tech E&O policy, et cetera. I don't do business owners. I don't do auto insurance. I don't do life or health or umbrella policies. I stick to E&O, tech E&O, cyber, and employment practices. Why do I do that? Because I have no value to add in the business owner's policy space. Like I don't find it interesting. I know enough about it to be dangerous just because of all the research that I've done and all the reading and writing I've done over the years, but that just doesn't get me jazzed. All right. Now, eventually, could I have my brokerage cross over into that space and offer the general liability insurance stuff? Yeah, I sure could. But to do that, I'm going to have to hire somebody who really specializes in that area. Okay. Likewise, like maybe maybe you're like super hard and heavy into manufacturing and now you want to cross over into financial services, right? Make sure you just go back to the beginning and you say, okay, if I'm going to do that, first step is knowledge, do no harm, get a basic level of competency. So you can see just from this picture in front of you, you can see where the different types of knowledge levels you have will directly impact the type of marketing. And I would encourage you, got a mosquito, Mr. Miyagi style or Karate Kid style. I would encourage you, start specializing. If you need some help there's a game called Knack. It's for your cell phone, Knack. And that'll tell you things that you're just naturally interested in. So like for me, man, technology is super cool to me. I love technology and I will always love technology. I've always loved technology since I was a kid. And so when an MSP comes to me with a problem, now I go, okay, I have that technology piece. It's not as sophisticated and as in-depth as say an MSP is, but I get the gist of it. Now I can take that knowledge. I can take all my master's in cyber law. I can take all my insurance background, insurance law, and I can take all of this to solve an interesting problem as opposed to, let's say, the drudgery of a artwork claim or something like that, right? Or the drudgery of a business owner's policy claim, because that's just not what I do. Now, what are the types of marketing you could utilize? There's a bunch. I put the ones in green that like really only you can do, and I put the ones in red that you could outsource. So you could do content marketing. I'm obviously a huge fan of that. Direct mail, email marketing, boots on the ground, cold calling. You can do webinars and conferences, SEO, pay-per-click, word of mouth, etc. Some of these can be combined. So you can really focus on content marketing, and then people can share that content out if it provides a lot of value. So then you'll get that word of mouth. I would say like there's no ideal type of marketing. And when we start thinking about like where could a marketing firm really add value here, I think the best place they can add value is where you are making that original content, you have those original ideas, and then you can use that marketing firm and the manpower that they have to leverage that across multiple channels. But when you're starting off, just focus on like one or two. Now, what actually works? I went down this rabbit hole for years, and it's a phenomenal waste of time. So here's why. Here's just one chart that I picked. And, maybe you're sitting there and you're like, oh, well, case studies is at 73% there. That's like middle and late stage. So I need to do case studies, but first I need to do like events and then offer a case study because events is the top of the funnel. So I'm going to go to an event and then I'm going to offer a case study. Please don't do that. One, you're just doing what everybody else does. And two, if you actually start looking into the methodology of these studies, like look down below. Only 87% were from North America and 2/3 had more than 10 million in revenue. All right. Software tech industry was the most heavily represented. So maybe that would work for like a specific piece of software, but maybe it doesn't work for an MSP, right? So maybe for an MSP, like videos are going to be the best, and white papers just aren't going to work at all. It just depends, right? So what type of marketing should you use? Like I said, it depends. Go back, hey, what's your knowledge base and your comfort level, right? Are you a generalist? Are you a specialist? Are you dominating various specialties? Next, think about how do you want to be marketed to? One of the big mistakes I made was I'm trying all these different types of marketing. And by the way, I failed at just about every type of marketing I've ever done, which is one of the reasons I'm making this video. And I'll give you an example. I spent the better part of a month writing like the perfect cold calling script. And then I sat down and I was like, God, I really don't want to do cold calls, but like maybe this is how I break through. I know some insurance companies and some insurance brokerages do cold calling and they're successful. And so I'm going to try that. Well, as it turned out, I absolutely sucked at cold calling. And the reason I sucked at cold calling is because I don't like people cold calling me. And so I think deep down inside, I was always just battling myself with like, I'm really sorry that I have to interrupt this person's day, or like, how do I get around the gatekeeper? And I just didn't find it very ethical and I didn't enjoy it. I don't like people marketing to me like that. And guess what? At the end of the day, I got absolutely zero traction out of all of that. Think about, what does your ideal client respond to? Okay. How is your ideal client going to find out about you? That will make the difference. Now, where should you market? I'm sorry, I should go back here. Your ideal client, like think about how you want to be marketed to, and then use that, and that will likely be your ideal client. Why do I say that? If you are, let's say you have like crippling introversion, all right? Well, if you start marketing at, let's say, webinars and conferences, and people are coming up to you and they're talking to you, who are the people coming up and they're talking to you? Probably the more extroverted people, and maybe you're a more introverted person. And so there's always going to be friction there. Whereas maybe you do decide you really want to go down that SEO pay-per-click avenue. Well, then those types of people that are going to respond to that are most likely the type of people that are going to be okay just receiving email communications as opposed to like phone calls, in-person videos, etc. Now, where should you market? I made this mistake as well. Natural proclivities reign supreme. I just chatted about that. Are you introverted? Are you extroverted? Are you a combination of both? As dumb as this sounds, go where your ideal customers go. If your ideal, let's say, vertical or specialty is not on Facebook, please do not spend a phenomenal amount of time with this like big Facebook ad campaign, because it's just going to go nowhere. You're going to waste a bunch of money and a bunch of your time, and it's going to be disheartening. So once you find out where your ideal customers go, it could be Reddit, it could be Facebook, it could be TikTok, it could be YouTube, it could be Twitter. Once you figure out where they are, could be conferences. It could be literally old school print magazines. It could be the newspaper, right? It just depends on who your ideal clients are and where they're going for information. Pick 2 channels at most. All right. Set aside 6 months for those two channels, and just for the first month, learn everything you can about that channel. Don't just dive in. Start looking at, okay, what's the tempo of language? Who are the heavy hitters here? Where do people go to for information? Who are the trusted voices? How can I partner with those trusted voices to get the best information out to this particular group, right? You're going to want to research first. Then for the next 5 months, add as much value as you can. Going back to the beginning, start thinking about, how do I just add value to this community? How do I keep providing value to them over a long period of time? And start with simple things, right? Even something simple. Why do farmers need MFA on email? I bet you that article doesn't exist. I bet you that video doesn't exist, but that targets a very, very specific market. Maybe you go and you're like, hey, agriculture, that's what I'm gonna get into. And so there is like this state society of farmers, and I'm gonna provide a whole bunch of information to those guys. So I'm gonna build up all this information just for farmers. Then I'm gonna go to the state society for these farmers, and I'm gonna say, hey, here's a bunch of information I have. I think it'd be useful to your particular membership. And they're gonna sit there and they're gonna go, by God, yes, it does. It's very, very specific. These general articles of like why MFA is important, we can read that stuff, but it doesn't really speak to your ideal customer. So go where they go and take the time to figure out where they go. Next, let's talk about the real goals of sales and marketing. Now, I've had people come up to me and they're like, whether it's over the phone or over Zoom, and they're like, hey man, I got this meeting with this ideal client. I want to talk to them about managed services, but like, I don't really know what to talk to them about, or like, how do I steer that conversation? Or, what do I have to do here? Man, I read dozens and dozens and dozens of books on sales and marketing, and it really just kind of comes down to the following. And it's just a step-by-step process. One, what problems does that business have? They could have service problems. I can never get a hold of my MSP. They could have access problems. My stuff never works. They could have security issues. They're really worried about ransomware. Or maybe they just can't sleep at night and they're like, I have 1,000 problems that I'm trying to deal with here. And it could be all three of these. And because of that, I just can't sleep. Then you get into, okay, whether they know it or not, here's some maybe additional concerns based upon the material they've already provided to you, right? So maybe they're saying, I'm really, really worried about ransomware. And you're like, all right, check, we can address that problem. Are you also worried about maybe a business email compromise? Because I noticed here, you don't have any security on your email, and that could be just as damaging as a potential ransomware event. So is that something you're worried about? Now, do they actually care about those problems? Right? If they don't care about those problems, they may have them, but if they don't care about them, cut your losses, walk away. You're just wasting everybody's time, and you're going to go down this big rabbit hole of like trying to claw back, and it's just very disheartening, and it doesn't work. Next, if they care about those problems, can you solve that problem? If it's a problem you can't solve, there's no reason for you to be there. Or it could be, hey, here are the problems I can solve. Here are the problems I cannot solve. Here are some additional resources for you for those additional problems that are just potentially outside of my wheelhouse. And then finally, what does all this boil down to? You take in all this information, right? What problems do they have? Do they care about those problems? Do they want them solved? If they do, can you solve those problems? All right, you can solve those problems. Then it's just the basic line. Here's what I would do if I were you, right? From what you've told me about your business, these are your specific concerns. Here's how we address those. And maybe you start off as an MSP and you're like, okay, we have a baseline level of cybersecurity that if we're going to do business, you have to start here. Now, based on what you've told me, what I would do if I were you is I'd bring the CFO in and we need to talk about, here's some additional controls you can implement. And I understand that you don't have unlimited funding, but I think it's really important. So maybe we should discuss a plan of implementation where we can build this up over a period of time so we're not just breaking the bank this quarter. It's really that simple, right? The same thing applies to insurance. So, does the business need insurance? Yes, right? I'll use an MSP example. Does an MSP need tech E&O insurance? Absolutely. What problems do they typically have there? They know nothing about it. Their insurance guy never taught them anything. It's just a renewal every year. They're not sure if it's the right thing or not. Next, do MSPs care about these problems? I would say 3-4 years ago, if I would have been putting out the same information, the timing just wasn't right because the claims just weren't there. Now, today is obviously very different, and the liability landscape for MSPs is just going exponential. So now MSPs care about those problems. Can I solve those problems? Yes, I do insurance for MSPs. Now, maybe they also have a problem with their business owner's policy and they're not sure what's in there. I don't do that. I'm going to provide additional resources for them to move from there. Then I just go in and I say, okay, here are the problems. Here's some things I can teach you. This is what I would do if I were you, right? I would fill out this application. Here's some pointers on the application. Now, over time, let's say as your business grows, you're going to have more employees. So maybe right now in employment practices policy, it's probably not the best bang for the buck for you, but that's something we should revisit over the next couple of years. It's just that simple. All right. So don't freak yourself out. You can literally just write down these questions on a piece of paper and go from there. Next, please don't get super hung up on all the metrics and statistics, etc. I had the same problem. It doesn't really matter. So you'd have to think to yourself, here's a snapshot from a couple of weeks ago from my YouTube channel. So you'll see 917 subscribers. I think it's a couple more now. Some videos you can see there, they do awesome. Some videos don't do well at all. Who knows, man? You can't beat yourself up. Sometimes the world is just a mystery. But what I will say is I would rather have 10 views on a video and then have 10 people that really care about the solutions I'm offering than have 1 million views on a video and only have one person care about the solution I'm offering. All right. So you don't have to rule the world. Don't get super caught up in metrics. It's kind of a fool's errand to a certain degree. So all of this boils down to really the following. Just write this down. What knowledge level are you at? Are you a generalist? You're like, hey, maybe you're super rural and you just can't have a critical mass of specific verticals to go after. That's fine. So now maybe you're like, I'm going to go to the local chamber of commerce and I'm going to say, for businesses in this geographic area, these are the problems that I'm seeing. This is how you solve those problems. Or you could say, hey, I'm in a big city and I could say, these are the issues I've seen in manufacturing, or these are the issues that I've seen in, the dental industry. That's kind of a low blow. That's an easy one. And that may take too long to talk about, but you get what I'm pointing to there. Next, who do you want to help? Right? You have to just narrow that down. You don't just shotgun or it's not going to work out well. As I said before, find those specific verticals, use the knack games on your cell phone to help you boil that down. Next, go where they're located, figure it out. Are they in Reddit, Facebook, private groups, state societies? If they're in private groups, you're probably not just going to barge in there and be like, hey, I do technology. If it's in a private group, it's probably for a very specific type of business. So if that's who you're going after, start providing free information that would eventually find its way into those private groups, right? And make sure that it's not salesy. You don't necessarily need to include your contact information or even your email or even your business name. All right. Maybe it's a state society. Once again, what's the easiest way to get into these groups? Put that love out into the world. Put all the help out into the world that you possibly can. Add as much specific value as you can. And eventually you're going to find your way in there. Next, figure out how can you help them? Are you an MSP? Are you an MSSP? Are you a combination of both? Do you also do break fix? Are you trying to get out of that? That will help guide your sales and marketing efforts. Because if you're trying to get out of the break fix industry, Obviously, you don't want to market that. Likewise, if somebody comes to you and they only want break fix services and you're trying to get away from that, it's just not a good fit. Take that energy, apply it to where you're trying to go. And then go, okay, what can I first offer them? All right, that's where you have to start. That's going to enable all the other stuff. You want to get into those Facebook groups. You want to be invited into those private groups. You want to be invited into state societies. People are going to share the information if it's useful, and word of mouth is going to go around, and eventually you're going to get in there. And then by the time you get in there, people are going to go, oh, I've seen this guy. I've seen this guy. I've seen this dude 1,000 times. I watch his videos all the time. And that trust elements are going to be taken care of. And then finally, you have to understand, why do you want to help these people? There has to be some guiding reason, because sales and marketing, it's a long process. The bigger the client, the longer it's going to take. There has to be some underlying reason besides just money and revenue, because after a certain point, like I'll just say right now, if I bring on yet another big client, it's not going to change my lifestyle. I can only drive one vehicle at a time. I like my truck. I probably wouldn't get another vehicle. I can only sleep in one bed at a time. I can only wear one pair of shoes at a time. So there has to be some deeper underlying reason. I think NAC is really going to help you with that. But you have to be able to figure out, what is it about them? Maybe you really want to get into manufacturers, but if it's because of money, you're going to burn out. But if maybe you're getting into manufacturers because you're like, man, this is the backbone of our economy. Like, people need jobs. We need to make sure that these manufacturers are staying secure, because that way, like the heartland, in the Rust Belt, et cetera, like we can bring those jobs back. If this manufacturer goes under, man, hundreds of people are going to lose their jobs in this town. That's going to be a much better driving force for you than just, hey, I want to make a buck. So I'll give you my example real fast, just to kind of help you out. Who do I want to help? MSPs. Where are they located? Primarily private groups that I've been invited to, and Reddit. How can I help them? I put out videos. What can I give them for free? All the knowledge in my head. There's nothing I have that's in my head that I wouldn't make a video about, quite frankly. So can I give them insurance for free? No. But can I give them all the tools necessary to get the best type of insurance, to understand that insurance, to provide those risk management, risk transference mechanisms? Can I do that? Absolutely. That's why I've got probably close to 100 videos on my channel now. And why do I want to help MSPs? Well, I firmly believe that the cybersecurity skills gap is only going to increase because there's an IQ issue there. So for all of these SMBs out there, I've seen what happens when they get hit with ransomware, when they get hit with data breaches, when they have business email compromise, and they don't have an MSP or an IT guy on staff, or maybe it's some guy moonlighting. I've seen what happens there. And I think increasingly it is a national security issue that we can have MSPs operating safely, efficiently, and effectively. And insurance is but a part of that, right? It's like the sleep good at night. It's the backstop if everything else goes wrong, but it enables an MSP to move forward confidently and provide those services. The more we can have competent and confident MSPs out there, the more secure SMBs are going to be, and that's really going to enable the SMB to be successful in our country. Now, a note on free. Knowledge should be free. Your services should not, within reason. Obviously, the bigger the client, you're probably going to need to do some extra things, but be careful about that, all right? Obviously, it's against the law for me to sell insurance for free, so it's easy for me to do that. But you don't just want to go in there and just burn tons of time providing these like super in-depth security analysis to every person that comes down the road. All right. So you have to kind of figure out, what service could you offer that ultimately you're going to have to start charging for. And once again, just be super obsessive. That's going to make everything else easier. It's going to make all the knowledge you provide easier, more specific, and more useful to your potential clients. Likewise, it's going to enable you to understand that specific industry, to go, okay, this is the tipping point for the common business owner in this specific industry. It's maybe this brief security assessment, or maybe for this industry, they we cannot get a contract signed unless we do a super deep dive in their security and provide all of these additional recommendations for them. Only you will know that if you are obsessive about their industry. And finally, at the end of the day, just remember this: hiring an MSP is going to be inevitable. So even if you screw up a million different ways, you're probably still going to get business, all right? If they know that you exist. If you can match up your expertise with the people that need it and the people that want it, eventually they're going to have to get an MSP. So it's going to take time. You got to build that trust. You have to show people you're going to be in this for the long run. You're not some fly-by-night company. You're in it for the long run. And eventually, I promise you, you are going to get business. All right, if you need some help with specialization, that's my latest book, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance and Compliance. You can download it there for free. Use a burning email address. I don't care as long as you get the book. If you want to fund my wife's Amazon habit, you can also buy it on Amazon. And she takes those checks, of course. All right, if you found this useful, you learned something, apologies for the length here, but I had a lot to say. Right above me, I'm going to put another video that I think you'll find useful. And if you click over there on my beautiful face, you will subscribe to my channel. All right, take it easy. Stay safe.